Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to Soap Thing Thoughts, episode 4. Joining me today is Smiley of SmilezforMilez. Welcome to the Soap Thing project. How you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me, Benjamin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. You were kind enough to have me on Shave Line NBD, so I figured I'd extend you the same courtesy.
Thank you.
So, tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up in brush making.
I've been doing art since 2 years old, and prolific artist, what they call as a prodigy, and been doing three-dimensional, two-dimensional work the majority of my life. Started painting at 2 and 10. I started doing portraiture work, doing portraits, and got turned on to ceramics at 10, and I got turned on to the lathe at 12 years old, and I seem to find myself attracted to things that spin in a circle in super fast rates, and started doing that. Grew up in a very abusive household. I didn't have a cheer section like most kids.
I'm sorry,
so I was
always
pretty much on my own. Not pretty much, I was always on my own. But through all that, I had art and I had skateboarding, and those are the things that kept me focused in. I got back into the lathe probably 2014 when my mother passed away. I took care of my mom till she passed from Parkinson's and dementia, and started taking care of my dad. My dad started contracting vascular dementia soon after my mother passed away, and he became bedbound within 6 months of him being diagnosed. To alleviate the stress and the mental anguish of watching my father slowly die, considering I already went through that with my mom, I set up a work studio in the house in a bedroom nearby, because he was living in the living room on a hospital bed, and it was an easy way for me to keep an eye on him. And I started turning anything really, pens, bottle openers, anything I could get my hands on, just to kind of hone my skills. And my aunt, who has been my cheerleader pretty much the majority of my life, she's a successful jewelry designer. She works with a house in Stockholm, Sweden, and she reached out to me and she asked me, she goes, honey, do you know what a shaving brush is? And I said, yeah. I haven't seen anything like those in a long time, not since my grandfather had them. She goes, well, they're really popular and it's becoming a thing again, an industry again, and I want you to make me one. I said, okay. So I sought out knots and picked up a few knots, and me being very particular artist from the get-go, I wanted to make sure I got good quality product to work with. I made the first brush and I sent it to her, and she's like, I think you got something here. You should continue down this path. So, okay. And at that time, I started getting into Instagram at the same time, and I discovered Yoast to Coast, and I was watching a lot of his content, and I noticed that he seemed to have a good pulse on the wet shaving community, or the industry, I should say, because I really didn't know the community very well at all. In fact, I met Sarasota Wet Shaver, I met DJ Lamb, I met Frank from Strike Gold, and Yoast to Coast. Those were the first ones that I met in the hobby. So I reached out to Yoast and I said, hey, do you mind if I send you a brush? I need some feedback. And he was like, why me? I'm like, well, you seem to have your pulse on the community or the hobby, and I really need feedback. I need to know what's going on, if I'm doing the right thing. You know what I mean? Being an artist, I need a lot of artists. We all like a little bit of constructive criticism to keep moving down the street, if you will. And yeah, he has the second brush. He still owns it to this day. That was a combination of African Paduke wood and recycled skateboard wood. And me being an old skater, it was very natural for me to start using recycled skateboarding wood way before I started making brushes. Um, and he gave me the feedback I needed, and here we are. You know, what, 6 years, 7 years later.
Well, the first half of that story is quite sad. I'm sorry it had to shake out that way.
Yeah,
When did
thank
you
you.
start skateboarding? I'm curious.
1974 is when I picked up my first skateboard. I was 10 years old. I went to go see, growing up here in Arizona, it's hot as all the Dickens in the summertime. And they would have booklets of movie tickets that we could buy. Well, my parents didn't buy me stuff, but luckily for me, I'm very resourceful. I worked 2 jobs at 10 years old that delivered newspapers and mowed lawns. So I had my own money, and I bought the booklet of movie tickets, and you go see like Bed Knobs and Broomsticks and Guns of Navarone and, like, all those True Grit, all those old movies. And one of the movies was called This Is Skateboarding, and it was literally um, Stessik's first full-length feature film featuring the Z Boys. And you can see like Tony Alva's wearing the helmet cam and, with the football helmet, and I got turned on. And me and my buddies were sitting in the front row, as most kids do at movie theaters. And I elbowed my bud, and I was like, "How do we do this?" He's like, "I don't know, but I want to do it." And I'm like, "Yeah, me too." So, long story short, I go home. My mother's like, "You want to go with me to the drugstore? I need to pick up prescriptions." And I said, "Okay." And anytime to go to the drugstore was a good time because there was a toy area there, and I'm a kid. And there's a sporting good area there, and again, I'm a kid. So she goes, does her thing, and I go directly to the sporting goods. And lo and behold, I found a skateboard. And it was clear red. Urethane wheels just came out. So it was clear urethane wheels with red wheels with loose bearings. And I bought it. It was $50. And I went and mowed lawns. And I would get $20 for a front and back lawn back then. So I went and mowed like 3 lawns, and luckily my clients needed their lawns done, and I went and bought me a skateboard, and went directly to the YMCA and started mimicking what I saw on that movie and doing the Bertleman slides and stuff, and teaching myself to skate. I learned in about 10 minutes to start pushing and riding around. Then I started teaching myself how to do these tricks, spinning in one space, 360s, doing Bertlemans, front side and back side, slaloming as hard as I could. And then I wanted to find transition of some sort. And, I started doing that. And I didn't know there was other kids in my neighborhood that rode skateboards. It was just me. It was, one thing about skateboarding has always been intriguing for me, coming from a broken home, is that it was my source of escape. I could, you know what I mean? Usually kids that come from broken homes dabble in drugs and alcohol and become career prisoners. Me, I fell in love with skateboarding, and that's what I think. I know that's what saved my life. So 1974, picked up my first skateboard, and soon after, I heard my mother tell my dad that don't bother having a relationship with him. He's not worth it. I went, okay, cool.
Wow.
So
Yeah, I didn't I discovered skateboarding, in the middle of the 1990s, 1995, 1996, when I was 7, 8 years old. And so I kind of associated that with the beginning of skateboard popularity. But I think I'm actually surprised to hear that skateboarding goes back that far. Not that I think that it's that old, but I kind
right,
of figured skateboarding was kind of a late 1980s thing that was just becoming popular, when I was a kid. No, it turns out it goes back quite a ways.
yeah. It my skate mom. We adopt each other in the skateboarding tribe and skateboarding family. So I have skate moms and skate dads that are my elders. My skate mom is the first female professional skater to be an any skater and ever to be on the cover of Life magazine. And she was on Life magazine after the assassination of Kennedy. So right after they put Lee Harvey Oswald on the cover, she was the next person to be on the cover of that magazine, or Time magazine, I should say.
That's
So she's
interesting.
been around for a long minute. And, back then, you rode a skateboard, it had metal wheels or clay wheels. Most of the time you were barefoot, slalom riding and handstands were the big tricks back then. And they actually had skateboarding, skate association back in the 60s.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So as long as I got a brush maker on here, we may as well talk about brush making. What can you tell me about brush making that the average wet shaver might be surprised to hear, that maybe breaks their assumptions about how brushes are made?
The time. There's a lot of time involved in making a one singular brush. And I think a lot of people that utilize the products that we make don't really understand that it's very time consuming. There's a lot of process involved, and could be, even the basic single pour, you still got to wait for that to cure before you can use it, start turning it. And, no matter how fast you can turn on a lathe, you still got to sand it. And that's usually a good chunk of time. Most makers, Benjamin, if you come across, you ask, what's the most annoying part of being a maker? And they will, 9 out of 10 will tell you sanding. Sanding is the biggest pain in the butt. You know what I mean? So I think that's one thing that consumers of utilizing brushes that we make aren't aware, that there is a serious time consuming process into making brushes. I've had customers think that I could bang out a brush in a day, a custom in a day. And I said, oh no, what you want, I gotta do a lot. If you want a hybrid, I gotta process the wood, and then I gotta stabilize the wood, reprocess the wood, and then put it in the mold, cast it, and then start drilling out the holes, and then turn, and then sand, and then finish. So that's about 7-8 steps that you got to get to a finished product.
Right. The average custom brush, even if there's no wait list, like I'm not going to have it in my hands for about 3 weeks. It's just not going to happen. Like I don't think I've ever gotten from me, from the artisan or the brush maker putting their stamp on, yes, I can do what you want, to it arriving on my doorstep at least 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm a little better. I'm a little faster turnaround. I'm usually about a 5 to 7 day turnaround. So usually within 5 days, it's already shipped. It's gone. 7 days at the latest. And, just depending on what I got to do. I've made some brushes that, the time was about 6 days, and it got done and it was on its way to its new owner. So I'm a bit faster, but I've also learned to work smarter and not harder. And then you add all the years of doing what I do under my belt, that comes with a lot of knowledge on top of it.
They say that in the Air Force a lot: work smarter, not harder.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good philosophy to live by. So you use wood, obviously probably stabilized wood, to make certain brushes. You also use resin. Do you use polyester resin?
No, polyester resin is inferior. It's an inferior product. The majority of vintage brushes, if not all, were made of a polyester form of some sort, Bakelite or whatever.
Okay.
The reason we do have vintage brushes around still is because owners were probably taking really good care of them. See a lot of old vintage brushes that have a lot of crazing going on. That's just the polyester breaking down over time. It starts showing crazing throughout the handle. Some cases, not so much, but they're still very brittle. Like even if I took a modern poured polyester resin blank and I turned it and then made a brush and I chucked it and it hit the cement, it'd break. Somewhere it would break. It's just not very durable. I use Alumilite resin, which is it's a
Tough
it's a
stuff. I've heard
form of,
about it.
yeah, it's super durable. Like I can throw things and it won't break. Like I've had things catch on the polishing wheel and it flies. Like it's like throwing 100 mile an hour, from a pitching machine, and slams right into the wall, and it's fine. Nothing happens to it. Not even a chip, not a mark, nothing. But with
Wow.
polyester, whole different animal.
Yeah, that was going to be another one of my questions is, I've seen people make brushes and their hand tools will catch it just in the right spot and it will shatter into 10 pieces. With Alumilite, do you tend to have that kind of problem?
It still happens, yeah.
Okay.
It's just the
Um,
nature of the beast. Not so much anymore. We knock on some wood. Um, but most beginners, I've heard a lot of that recently because we got a lot of new guys starting to turn, like Dougie from Dougie Shaving. He's starting to turn. Um, and first thing they say is, "Oh man, I was almost done, and I just had to do one more cut, and it caught, and just boom." And I'm like, "Welcome to my world." It doesn't happen to me as much as it used to, but it does occur. Or you'll have something that you epoxy together, cast it together, and it's a weak spot in there, and you go to turn it and it blows up and half of it hits you in the chest, the other half hits you in the face mask. I've had both of those happen. Not as much as it used to, but it does happen. It does occur.
so when you shatter a brush into several pieces, is any of that salvageable? Like, can you melt it down, or is it pretty much just it goes in the trash?
Trash. You can utilize it, like cut it up. I've taken brushes that have broken, that have been shattered from that, and just save the pieces in a bag, and then I'll go back and cut them into chunks, and then cast that all together in a whole new blank, and then turn that, and it comes out pretty cool. But it's trying to utilize, it's trying to save chaos and bring something back from the dead, if you will, give it new life.
Right. So how does one actually make resin? Like I've seen people do it on video before where it almost looks like you just throw it in this rectangular pot and it's just kind of boiling up. What exactly is taking place when you do that?
Well, there's different forms of casting. So you're referring to a vacuum chamber form of, and I don't personally feel like that's a really an ergonomic way of casting. I feel like you're actually going to cause more issues, adding more potential air bubbles to it. What I do is I use pressure. And what I use 80 pounds of pressure in my when I put my blank into the pressure pot, and with 80 pounds of pressure, what it does is it shrinks the bubbles down to nothing, or where you can't even see them, or it just pops them, and so therefore you get a clear cast. Some guys will take their resin and put it in a vacuum chamber prior to pouring and pulling out air. Um, but once you open up that chamber, the air is wanting to rush back in, right? So that to me leaves room for some chaos. So I never really messed with that. Another method of people using things that bubble is when we stabilize wood. Like I have another chamber, it's a vacuum chamber, and I'll take whatever burl or wood you want in your blank, and I'll submerge it into the stuff called cactus juice, and I'll submerge it, weight it down, and then I'll throw on the vacuum. That's about 15 pounds of vacuum pressure, and it pulls all the air out of all the membrane of the wood and replaces it with stabilizing solution. And you'll do that for about 12 to 24 hours, and then pull it, let it soak for another 24 hours, and then pull it and drain it, wipe it down, and then wrap it up in foil, and you throw it in the oven and you bake it for a period of time and a certain temperature to set that resin into the wood membrane. And then this way now you have something that's way more stabilized than just a free form natural piece of wood, something that you can work with a lot easier than just a regular piece of wood. Less chances of it shattering on you or breaking on you, giving way from weakness into the wood. You know, a lot of people utilize, there's other stabilizing solutions that people utilize in rotting wood, and you just brush it on and the wood soaks it up and makes the wood a little bit harder than having to replace the whole thing. Kind of the same animal, but we're utilizing it more in a fine art aspect and utilizing to be able to stabilize a nice chunk of wood to be able to work with.
Oh, that's a lot of information to take in. Let me ask you this: is brush making this is that something that anybody can just do in their basement? Because I know you got to have a lot of machinery to make the resin blanks, and you got to have a CNC lathe so you can spin the thing, and you got to have proper hand tools and protection and stuff like that for your face. Do you really have to kind of be invested in this to have any hope of really doing it?
That or you have to be wealthy, because it is an investment, and you better, you know, for a working class person like me to make that move, I had to make sure that was the move I wanted to make. I can't afford to just go throw down, you know, for $200 on, even on Harbor Freight. It's still $299 or whatever for a lathe, and then the tools, and then the vacuum chamber, and then the stabilizing, you know, the pressure pot, and then, you know, buying the tools, and then buying the molds, and then, you know, so there's a big investment. I got lucky. My aunt, that's the jewelry designer, she bought me my first lathe. And then the pressure pot was a pressure pot used for painting, and the pressure with air to spray paint on walls, you know, for like a house, remodeling houses. I found that on the side of the road, and I figured out how to convert it into what I needed it for. And so that was free. I did invest in a vacuum and a vacuum chamber. That was another $200-300. I would say to get started, it was about a couple grand to get started.
It makes a lot of sense. So you really got to be kind of focused. Like I better make this work and better make some money with it. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of money kind of down the toilet.
Right.
It sounds like. What brushes would you say are harder to make? Wood brushes or resin brushes?
I would say multiple materials put together.
So like hybrid brushes.
Yeah, like hybrids, because you're dealing with different different materials that cut differently. So like, you know, you got a wood and acrylic. Even though the wood stabilized, it's still going to cut easier than acrylic. So you have to be aware of, when you're going through the process, you don't put too much pressure in where the wood is, and you have to put a little more pressure where the acrylic is to get it to cut evenly. So I would say the mixed mediums are the harder ones to mess around with, especially if you mix, like, say you glued an Alumilite piece with a Bakelite piece. Well, now you have two different densities of material you're working with, so you have to be careful. One's softer than the other.
Right. Maybe you can dispel a myth for me, because up until now I've kind of stayed away from wood brushes because I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to wear the finish off and the water is going to screw up the wood and it's just going to be a mess, and I'm not messing around with wood brushes. You know, tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong and right, and that is all depending on the maker. There's makers out there that I've gotten so pissed off when I see their work, because it's beautiful. They put a lot of energy into it, but all they did was put a coat of beeswax on it. And that drives me up the fucking wall. It's like, if you don't want your product to last the test of time, then don't do this business. You know, don't get involved. Just be a user, because it really is irritating to watch. For me, I use an automotive clear over my wood. It doesn't matter if it's a hybrid. Even though the wood's stabilized, there's always room for error. You know that, being in the military, there's always room for error. You got to be verbatim, make sure everything is done. All I's are dotted and all T's are crossed, correct?
Yeah, because people are watching.
Yeah, it's the same thing with as a maker. With a prolific maker like myself, you have to be very, very, very much aware of what's going on. So if you're making a hybrid, and you have to be aware and know that there's chaos can come and rest its weary head on your project. In order to keep that from occurring, I use automotive clear, and I'll put 5, 6 coats of automotive clear over a hybrid. Again, even though the wood is stabilized with a plastic resin, doesn't mean diddly squat in my world. So
So
if it's just like skateboard wood, it's definitely getting 5 to 6 coats of automotive clear before it leaves my house.
so when you put automotive clear on it, and then once somebody gets in there shaved in, you got to really be screwing around to rub all that off. Basically, that's not going away easily.
Nope.
Okay. Well, that
Just
makes
the
a lot of
same way you
sense.
go up to sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Just the same way as you can't rub clear off of a car, you can't rub that clear off of that wood either. If it's done correctly, you can't. There's no way of rubbing that away.
Interesting. I'll have to file that away for future use. That's definitely good to hear. So you got into fragrances, making fragrances recently. How what kind of a journey has that been?
It's something I've always wanted to do. Growing up in the 80s as a club kid, you're exposed to fragrances very early. I had even though I came from the broken home, I still had a father that was like the groom. So he had a collection of fragrances. So I was pretty much always around it. In the 80s, I wanted to get into fashion design. But they said little boys aren't supposed to be fashion designers. And I'm like, what the fuck is that all about? Like, I didn't understand. To me, it didn't make
Yeah, why the
sense.
hell not?
Yeah, didn't make any sense.
Whatever.
And I did it anyways. And I always wanted to be a designer for fragrances. And I always thought it was unobtainium. It's just unobtainable to be able to do that. How do you do that? Where do you go? Where do you start? And about a year ago, almost 2 years ago now, we were doing I do a show on Shave Line MVD that you've been on our show with Razor Ray. And we were doing a fragrance show. And Razor Ray did a banner and it said Smiles Elixir and says to me in the background, he's like, now we just need to find somebody to make it. And I'm like, okay, great. You just introduced a thought into a hyper focused human being. So of course that's going to sit and mill around in my head for a long minute. I was out running errands and doing laundry and, like most of us do when we used to do laundry out of our houses, like I do now in my older age. But I would do my wash, and then once I threw it in the dryer, I was out. I'd go grab a bite, something, because that's usually the longer time, right? So I did that, and I took off, and I'm driving around my neighborhood, and I see this like fold out sign, like one of those Apex signs. It said fragrance. That's all it said was fragrance. And I'm like, no arrows, no name, just fragrance. I'm like, okay. So I turn towards the sign, and all of a sudden I find myself in this little office complex, and there's a development house in there. And I walk in, and I'm, talking to the girl, the receptionist, and she's asking me what I could help me with, and I'm trying to explain, like, I'm just trying to figure out what you guys do, and I really want to get into designing fragrances. Well, out of the corner of my ear, I hear the Smiles. That was my friend Bonnie. And Bonnie and I are old club kids from the 80s. We'd go dancing with all of our group of our friends. And she had been started out at like a little like essential oil shop called Jute and Hoops. So it was kind of like the hippie store. Hippies went and got their, different body oils, and that's where she started. Lost track, found each other. Now she works for this big development firm. I can't even tell you anything other than she works for a development firm. It's very secretive. Unbeknownst to me, it's way more secretive than I ever thought it would be. You would think like, oh, it's just a fragrance, whatever, who cares? Oh no. Like I asked, like, who do you work with? And she's like, I can't tell you that. Like, and then when I got to go to the studio, the pro studio, no cameras, no nothing. I had to wear a thing around my beard, a thing on my head, goggles, full jumpsuit, booties, gloves, wind tunnel, and then you go in to work. And prior to going in, we sat and talked, and I told her what I was looking to do. And So when we got into the studio, she pulled from it was really cool, Benjamin. It was like shelves, lit up shelves. You're surrounded by lit up shelves, and they all held like beakers of essential oils, different, different colors, obviously. Just really cool looking, very surreal. And she pulls a seaweed accord, which is an accord is several notes to make one. And then she pulled a cucumber water. And she's like, okay, go. And that's when Elixir M started to get built. And I spent 8 hours in there the first time I worked, and came out with Elixir M. Didn't tell anybody, not even Ray. Nobody knew what I was doing in the background. I kept it under wraps 100%. And till I was getting ready to drop it. And I dropped last April, May. And out of left field, people are like, what the hell happened? When did this happen? I'm like, well, I don't tell you guys everything. So I spent a year researching too on top. Like I would get, George Zaharoff as a friend, and he sends me fragrances, and, God bless him for giving me those gifts. But I looked up all the notes, and I have a Bible that I write all the notes from different fragrances. So I wrote the ones that I got from George, and it's not to dupe, it's education, right? It's just to teach, learning, to give us learning information to create from. And then I met Chef Scott Aromatico and Callie from Callie's Broom Room, and then I met Chef Cance. Chef Mo sent me a fistful of decant, and I referred to myself as a nerd. I'm very proud of that. I looked up all the notes, and then I wrote them down in my book. So I accumulated this book of notes, and I utilized those notes for research information to build off of. And then, of course, that led me to watching people's lives, listening to fragrance designers talk about different notes, writing them down. One of my good buddies is Leroy. He's representative of Zaharoff Down Under in Australia. He's actually distributing my Elixir M for me down there. He too, I pick his brain. He's very knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable. You can take him to a fragrance counter, and he'll pull things and start talking about them. Just super knowledgeable about fragrances. So he taught me a lot as well. So with all that, that's how I started doing fragrances. And now here I am with 8 different fragrances under my belt.
Wow, it sounds like you were in the right place at the right time with the right intentions in mind. And sometimes the stars just align properly right when you need them to.
Yeah, and you're personally responsible for Elixir 3.
Is that one still available?
Yeah.
I'll have to look on our website.
The only thing I added to it was a lotus flower. I added an aquatic to the 3.
I'll have to take a look on your website, see if I can't get my hands on that one.
Yeah, it's got, and the other thing I changed, instead of it being a red rose or a pink rose, I use a white rose, a little sweeter.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a great fragrance. I'm thankful. Thank you for sharing that when you're on our show, because you triggered my brain. Things. That's how like Carnival of Sin got created. I was watching Dusk Till Dawn, and that part where Hyatt, she's dancing on the table. That triggered Carnival of Sin to be built.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, what were we conversating about? We were talking about what scents have to come together to make an Arabian oud scent, and it was something. I think an Arabian oud is oud, rose, and saffron. Is you find those a lot together in Arabian made oud men's fragrances. That combination is really popular over there for some reason. I don't know why, but it is. And yeah, sounds like you were able to put something together that made it pretty good.
Yeah, I took the saffron out, replaced it with Arabian sandalwood, and I added lotus flower, and I took out the red rose or the pink rose, either one's being used, and replaced it with a white rose.
I'll have to check that out, maybe pick some of it up.
Yeah, it's really good. I love it.
Okay, well, we are coming up on our 30 minutes. Thankfully, I did subscribe to Zoom, so we don't have to worry about Zoom kicking us out. But we do want to keep the video to a relative consistent time frame. If you were in an elevator with somebody and you had to sell your brushes and or your fragrances in 30 seconds, what would you say?
I usually do that when I go get breakfast every weekend. I meet somebody new, and conversation strikes up. What do you do? Oh, I'm an artisan. Really? Yeah, I'm a world-known artisan. Oh, what do you do? I show my Instagram. I make brushes. Oh, that's really beautiful. I'd like to get one. Okay, cool. I'll get you set up and we'll communicate. Other one is people just automatically are like, wow, what's that smell? That smells really good. What is that? I'm like, oh, that's me. I design fragrances. This is what I made. And this is the name of it. And then how do I get it? This is where you go get it. And I show them my Etsy and boom, there it is. That's usually what I do when I'm out in the wild.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I like it.
You
Well,
gotta,
go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt you, Benjamin. You need to be somewhat of a chatty Cathy, and you need to be somewhat of a used car, not a used, like a car salesman. You need to be able to put yourself out there. You need to be able to communicate with strangers, and you need to understand that you're not always going to get a great response.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Well, I definitely need to check out some stuff on your website. I haven't had the pleasure of having one of your brushes yet, so we should probably communicate on that offline and talk about. I've looked at some of your older posts on Instagram, some of your older brushes like that. Those 8 ball brushes you were doing, those are
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
Are you still capable of doing those?
yeah. I can still do them. Takes a little bit. There's a lot of steps in that one, but that's another razor ray fueled idea. The lava brush is a razor ray fueled idea. He just throws ideas at me, and then I do the math and figure it all out. I break it down and get it to bring it to life.
I've actually got one more closing question for you. So your stuff is on Murphy and McNeil's website quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
How did they're actually? I have no problem saying this. They're my all-time favorite artist, and I love their products and the way they do business. How did you come to be associated with them? I'm curious.
The pirate, the red shaving pirate, lather me whiskers. He's friends with them. And he reached out to them and said, "Hey, I got an artisan buddy. He's a brush maker, and he's looking for a format other than Etsy." And they're open arms. Come on in, Smiles. This is what you need to do. They've helped me out tremendously. I'm an old guy. You can tell I got silver facial hair. So, I have to kind of catch up with technology now and again, and they help me get through. So that's how I started with them, to the point where I did their Dia de los Muertos drop last year. I did a collaboration with them, and I made never before done 3-dimensional sugar skull brush handles.
Wow, that sounds like another example of kind of being in the right place at the right time. That's good to hear.
Yeah, those when you're a maker, you become part of a tribe of people and we try to help each other out. It doesn't matter what format you're working under. So my buddy Twisted Turnings, he's a caster. He does, beautiful castings for blanks and stuff. He was working with another friend of his named Tinker, who's a military veteran. And you'd be surprised, Benjamin, how many military vets are in the maker circle. But I was like looking at Tinker's stuff, and Tinker was doing the liquid 3-dimensional printing where he goes in the vat and then it pulls out, eventually it pulls out the 3-dimensional image, right? And you don't have those lines of like a regular 3D print. This is actually solid liquid and cured. So I'm like, okay, I got this collaboration with Murphy McNeil, and so I reach out to Tinker and I'm like, hey, bro, is it possible to three-dimensionally print a frame of a sugar skull? He goes, let me see what I can do. I'm like, okay. He did the tiki dolls. I did those first, and you know, and he came up with one. And it took about 3 iterations, Benjamin, before we finally came with a conclusion of the finished product. And I was able to do these sugar skulls with the colorway of Murphy McNeil's soap set. And nobody had done that prior. And now, I've always been, I'm just going to say it, and people don't like it, but I just don't care. I've always been the guy creating a trail for other people to run. And mixing the medium of liquid three-dimensional printing and casting resin with, making in the brushes is what I brought to the table. And there's been other people now are doing it. So you got Opus, he does it now. There's other brush makers that are utilizing that information. I can't say they got it from me, but I can say that I'm the first one to do it. So, it's just something that I've always been intrigued with. I like to push the envelope, mix different mediums together. I use ocotillo ribs, an ocotillo cactus produces these cylindrical, arms, right? Well, when it dies, that's bark. It just comes right off. And you're left with this wood. So I would stabilize ocotillo wood and mix that and make those into brushes. I'd take prickly pear cactus skeletons. There's a skeleton in the prickly pear petals that once it dies and dehydrates, you break it apart and you're left with these really durable skeletons. I cast those in the brushes as well. So I've always done a lot, pushing the envelope a lot in the hobby, and to bring very unique, one-of-a-kind works for you guys to utilize. I have my work all the way down in Armenia. I have my work all the way up in Greenland and everywhere in between around the world.
That's cool stuff. That's cool to hear.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a fragrance in arm's reach to do the frag out?
I actually do, and I'm going to use Scent Obsession. And this was given to me by LX Fragrances, and it's a tobacco fragrance.
Tobacco.
Yeah.
Tobacco fragrances are definitely in fashion this time of the year. Admittedly, I got the frag out from you. I'm actually going to use I'm just going to do Chanel Platinum Egoist.
Very,
it's
very
a
nice.
fougere from the 90s. Now, 90s fougères are very citrus heavy, like Calvin Klein Eternity, Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, and then Chanel Platinum Egoist are really citrus forward fougères. So if you're into that sort of thing, that's kind of the direction I'm going to tell you to look. What else is in it besides what else is in yours besides tobacco?
This one's a tobacco. It's got citrus in it. It's got some orange. This makes a really nice combination. Trying to think, there's a little bit of hay. There's a little bit of like fougere. There's a little bit of a earthy and thing going on. So there's some hay in here, and a little bit of patchouli.
Okay, so I'm guessing it kind of rounds out to be this slightly sweet, slightly crisp, maybe earthy kind of package that it puts all together for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
it's definitely sweet. You're catching with the hay and tobacco are making a sub note of a caramel, and the citrus and the patchouli are just smoothing everything out. You really can't catch the citrus or the patchouli. It just really, a lot of fragrance designers use patchouli light or medium, just to round out the harsh edges of some of the notes. Like Elixir M has patchouli in it, but it's 1/32 of an ounce.
right. Yeah, a lot of people when they hear patchouli, they tend to think, oh, it's going to be like an armpit patchouli where it smells like BO. No, not usually not. That's not how it shakes out.
No, it's actually, correct myself, 1/32 of a milliliter. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
1/32 of a milliliter. So that's like to a naked eye, it looks like almost nothing.
Yeah, it's I can do it with my fingers. About that much. It measures out to about 4 drops to 30 milliliters to an ounce. So 4 drops of patchouli to a whole ounce. And it changes the game that much, those 4 little drops.
Wow. That's
crazy.
That is crazy. Well, what do you have for parting words for members of the wet shaving community? Any words of wisdom before we get out of here?
Yeah. Remember, it's only shaving. And enjoy each other's time and be kind to each other.
Yeah, we can have these discussions and people can agree to disagree, but I think to an extent, some people get a little too passionate where they can't handle opinions that differ from their own.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
appreciate the
unfortunate
passion.
that it comes to that.
Yeah. I appreciate the passion. I really do. Passion is a beautiful thing, but it can also be an ugly thing if you can't see the light of day in the middle of your passionate idea.
Well said. Well, Smiley, I want to thank you very much for the privilege of being able to talk to you for about half an hour. Thanks for coming on the show. You are, of course, welcome back anytime. I will, in the bottom of the video, put all of Smiley's Instagram information as well as his Etsy page. So if you want to check out his products or his social media content on Instagram, feel free to go into the description of the video and check him out. Thank you once again, Smiley, for coming out here. I really do appreciate it. This is Soap Thing telling you, shave like you mean it. Thanks for watching.